Perhaps right now, as you press play, your mind is still carrying too much noise. Thoughts that have not yet settled, small but persistent worries. Questions about life, about meaning, about yourself quietly circling even as your body has grown tired. This video was not created to give you more information. It does not ask you to concentrate to understand or to remember anything at all. This is only an invitation to step gently out of the hurried rhythm of the world and into another kind of space where the universe becomes so vast that personal worries begin to feel smaller. On tonight's journey, we will touch together on the strange and slightly unsettling truths of space. Black holes, hypotheses about reality, questions without answers. But they will not be told as frightening things. They will be told as slow, quiet whispers to remind you of something simple and kind. You do not need to understand the universe in order to be at peace within it. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And perhaps in the gentle darkness of the universe tonight, you will not need to awaken, only to allow yourself to rest. There is a thought that feels strangely unfamiliar yet deeply human that arises whenever one gazes at the night sky for long enough. That perhaps the universe is not vast in the way we have always imagined. That maybe everything we call space-time galaxy's light is unfolding inside something far deeper, far darker, and far quieter than we can perceive. Black hole cosmology is not a recent idea born from modern imagination. It was proposed seriously by physicists decades ago as part of a long effort to face an ancient question: what lies beyond the final boundary of understanding? According to this hypothesis, the entire universe we observe, every star you have ever seen, every galaxy ever photographed, even the most distant light just now reaching Earth, may be nothing more than the interior of a black hole belonging to a larger universe. The edge of our universe, where light can no longer escape, may in fact be an event horizon, the very point of no return we assign to black holes within our own cosmos. If this is true, then something very quiet yet profoundly overwhelming comes into view. We are not inside the universe. We are inside a boundary. This boundary is not a wall. It does not appear as a clear outline. It is a limit we cannot see, cannot cross, and perhaps can never truly know whether it exists at all. This idea frightens many people. But when seen more slowly, more deeply, it carries a very different tone, one closer to contemplation than to panic. In human life, we are always living within invisible boundaries. The limits of memory, the limits of language, the limits of the ego. We often believe we are the center of the story, that our thoughts are the entirety of reality. Until an event occurs, a loss, a long, sleepless night, and we suddenly realize that there are things existing very close to us that we have never once touched. Carl Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Black hole. Cosmology, in a strangely resonant way, echoes this very structure. We live in a space that appears boundless, yet is enclosed by a horizon we cannot directly perceive, just like the human mind. One idea that makes this hypothesis feel unexpectedly intimate is the notion of turtles all the way down. Each black hole in this universe, if the hypothesis is correct, may contain a child universe within it. And within that child universe, there may be other black holes, and so on, nested within one another without a clearly defined endpoint. Not a chaotic structure, but a quiet chain of generation. This touches a very deep human fear. The fear that there is no final layer, no absolute foundation on which we can stand and say, this is the ultimate truth. Yet this very absence carries a subtle form of healing. If the universe has no absolute center, if we do not live at the bottom or the top, then feeling small is not a failure. It is the natural state of existence. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "He who knows himself to be deep endeavors to be clear." Perhaps accepting that we live inside a structure deeper than ourselves allows us to loosen our grip on the need to control everything. You do not need to understand the entire universe, just as you do not need to understand your entire self in order to rest. In black hole cosmology, the event horizon is not a place of destruction. It is a place where information no longer returns. Once crossed, everything still exists. It simply no longer belongs to the old point of view. Perhaps in our inner lives, we also have such event horizons, boundaries of experience where one version of the self quietly disappears and another begins to form. Without noise, without announcement, only silently. And as you lie here listening to stories of black holes, you do not need to imagine a terrifying universe. Imagine instead a vast embrace of reality, where everything is held within, nothing falls away, nothing vanishes. Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov. The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for. Perhaps what is worth living for is not the conquest of the universe, but the ability to remain gently within it, even without fully understanding it. If the universe truly is a black hole, then you and I are inside a place that has held light, time, and the capacity for consciousness for billions of years. And right now it is holding you safely enough to let your breath soften your mind slow down and sleep arrive not as an escape, but as a return. There is nowhere you need to go, no boundary you need to cross, only to remain still within the event horizon of the night. When the thought that the universe itself might exist inside a black hole has just barely settled, we often tend to treat it as a beautiful metaphor, a philosophical possibility rather than something that could ever touch data. And then, very quietly, a new lens opens. Not within the human mind, but in deep space. The James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, was not launched to search for frightening stories. It was created to see farther more clearly and more honestly than any human eye before it. Without emotion, without assumption, only ancient light traveling for billions of years reaching a sensor. And within that neutrality, something very strange appeared. When JWST observed the most distant galaxies, ancient galaxies formed when the universe was still very young, scientists expected something very simple: randomness. In a universe with no preferred direction, galaxies should rotate evenly, half clockwise, half counterclockwise, 50-50, balanced, quiet. But the data did not say that. Roughly 2/3 of the observed galaxies appeared to rotate in the same direction. Not a minor deviation, not background noise easily dismissed, but a bias large enough to make scientists pause. And in that moment, a hypothesis once placed in the category of interesting but extravagant black hole cosmology was suddenly spoken aloud again. If the entire universe is rotating, if it carries an overall angular momentum, then this asymmetry is no longer meaningless. It becomes a trace. And if the universe is the interior of a black hole, then its rotation is no longer strange at all. Black holes spin. Most of them do. They are born from stars that spent their entire lives rotating. And when they collapse, they do not lose that motion. There is a deep quiet in this thought, that perhaps the entire space in which you exist is drifting in a slow, steady motion you cannot feel. Like the earth turning. Like you moving through time without hearing any gears. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, "The most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking. We are accustomed to living within motion, yet unaccustomed to recognizing it. We tend to feel unease only when something does not remain as still as we assumed. The idea that the universe is rotating may worry some people as if the foundation of reality has tilted slightly. But if we look with the slow rhythm of the night, another gentler understanding appears. If the universe has a direction, then it is not entirely chaotic. If there is an axis of rotation, then a quiet form of order exists. Not an imposed order, not a rigid design, but an order born of natural motion, just like the inner life of a human being. We often believe that a peaceful mind is a still mind without thought, without fluctuation. But in truth, a healthy mind is not still. It rotates. It transforms. It moves through layers of awareness without colliding with itself. Carl Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "Life is a process of becoming a combination of states we have to go through." JWST, in a strangely poetic way, has shown us that even the universe is becoming, not a static image, but a process. And this connects naturally to the thought from the previous part. If the universe is the interior of a black hole, then its overall rotation is not a flaw. It is a trace of origin, a physical memory, an ancient inertia. Just as within a human being, there are emotions that do not originate in the present, but in experiences far away very early, even before we had language to name them. Dostoevsky wrote in Notes from Underground, "I am a sick man, I am a spiteful man." not to glorify suffering, but to show that human beings carry their own history in even the smallest movements of the mind. The universe may be the same. Perhaps the rotation of galaxies is not a message meant to provoke fear, but a reminder that everything has momentum and you do not need to resist it. If tonight your mind does not feel, still remember this: stillness has never been the natural state of life. Even the universe is turning, very slowly, very evenly, without urgency. And you are allowed to turn with that rhythm. You do not need to understand all the data from JWST. You do not need to decide which hypothesis is correct, only to feel this. Even within a reality as vast and strange as this, one motion is not a threat. It can be an ancient lullaby carrying everything, including you, gently inward, into a sleep deep enough that there is nothing left to hold up. When the thought that the universe itself might be rotating has just begun to settle, when the distant galaxies recorded by JWST no longer appear as random points of light but carry a shared direction of motion, we suddenly realize something. Perhaps the most unsettling thing is not that the universe is not still, but that it may be moving towards something. And at precisely that point, an ancient question, quiet yet impossible to avoid, emerges once more. What truly happens inside a black hole? For a very long time in the human imagination, a black hole has been the absolute end, a place where everything falls in and never returns, a cold death of light, of time, of meaning. But science, like philosophy, has a way of unsettling conclusions that feel too final. Some modern physicists have begun to consider a very different possibility: that inside a black hole what occurs is not eternal collapse, but an extreme process of transformation. According to these models, when matter falls into a black hole, it is not compressed endlessly into an infinite singularity. Instead, when rotation, density, and energy reach an unsurpassable threshold, the system rebounds. Not noisily, not explosively in the usual sense, but as a profound reversal in the structure of space-time itself. And this rebound astonishingly gives rise to something deeply familiar: a phase of extremely rapid expansion, a hot, dense, energy-rich state, a new space born from its own limit. It resembles the Big Bang so closely that one is compelled to slow down and think again. If this is true, then our Big Bang may not be the beginning of everything, but the beginning of a layer, a child universe born from the death of a massive star in another universe. This thought carries a strange kind of beauty, not violent, not frantic, but almost gentle. It evokes something very familiar in human life, that some endings are not meant to close things off, but to open them. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "What does not kill me makes me stronger, but perhaps at times what does not kill us creates an entirely new world within us." If the Big Bang is a byproduct of a star's death, then the whole of our history, from galaxies and planets to life itself, and to this very moment in which you are listening to these words, is an echo of a collapse that occurred elsewhere. This profoundly changes how we see origins. The universe is no longer a random act of violence. It becomes a consequence, a continuation. And within that continuation, death is no longer the absolute enemy of meaning. It is a condition for something else to be born. Carl Jung wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Perhaps black holes are the deep roots of the universe, and the Big Bang is the trunk rising from them. If we return to the observation in part 2 that the universe may be rotating, this idea becomes even more coherent. A rotating black hole gives rise to a universe that carries angular momentum, a motion passed down, a physical memory transmitted across layers of reality. Just as human beings carry psychological patterns from previous generations, from experiences that were never given names. Dostoevsky wrote in The Idiot, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." If the Big Bang is not an absolute beginning, then our existence is no longer a solitary miracle in an indifferent void. It is a link in a long chain of transformations, and this very gently lightens the weight of the question, why am I here? Perhaps you do not need a complete answer. Perhaps existence itself does not need to be justified by a final purpose. If the universe was born from a rebound, then reality itself is telling us something quietly important. Not all pressure leads to destruction. There are points of compression that create space. There are limits that generate possibility. And in the inner life, there are dark nights not meant to make you disappear, but to allow another part of you to take form. As you lie down, as your breath slows, as your thoughts stop straining to find a way out, perhaps a very small kind of rebound is happening within you as well. Not creating a universe, but creating rest. If our Big Bang is the echo of an ancient death, then your sleep tonight may be the echo of a long day. And just as the young universe did not need to understand what it was in order to expand, you do not need to understand everything in order to be at peace. Simply allow the pressure to stop tightening, and allow yourself to rebound very gently into the stillness that is already waiting. When the thought that the Big Bang may have been nothing more than a rebound inside a black hole has just begun to settle, when the universe is no longer seen as an absolute beginning, but as the after-echo of a very distant death. Another door, quiet yet more daring, slowly opens. If our universe could be born from the collapse of a star in another universe, then an unavoidable question arises very gently, very slowly. What if there exist intelligences capable of deliberately creating such a process? On the Kardashev scale, a way of classifying the level of advancement of civilizations type 3 is almost mythical. A civilization that does not merely harness the energy of a planet or a star, but of an entire galaxy. At that level, the creation of an artificial black hole is no longer pure science fiction, but a physical possibility, however unimaginably distant it remains for humanity today. And if black hole cosmology is correct, if the interior of a black hole is not nothingness but a space waiting to be born, then what follows becomes both unsettling and strangely reasonable. A highly advanced civilization might create a black hole not only to harvest energy, but to build a new universe. Not to conquer, not to expand territory, but to leave. This idea overturns one of humanity's greatest questions entirely, the Fermi paradox. If the universe is so vast and so old, why do we see no one? Perhaps they did not vanish, they did not destroy themselves, they did not hide. Perhaps they moved. A customized universe, a space with more stable physical constants, less radiation, more time, less randomness. A place better suited for the continuation of intelligence. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything is ephemeral fame, and the famous as well." Perhaps even the universe itself is something a sufficiently deep intelligence would regard as temporary. And if so, then the ultimate outcome of evolution is not the domination of space, but knowing when to leave it. This idea carries a very different tone from the familiar stories of alien invasion. No war, no landing, no contact. Only a quiet decision. This universe has fulfilled its role. Like a human being who, when a house no longer nourishes their inner life, does not destroy it, but simply steps outside, closes the door, and does not look back. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote in Being and Nothingness, "Man is condemned to be free." A Type 3 civilization, if it exists, may also be condemned by its own freedom, the freedom to choose the reality in which it wishes to live. And from our perspective, the silence of the universe becomes less frightening. It becomes the sign of a maturity that has already left the room. What makes this idea unexpectedly intimate, however, has little to do with aliens and everything to do with human psychology. We do this too on a far smaller scale. When an old identity no longer fits, when a system of values no longer sustains the life within, when an inner universe becomes too harsh, we do not destroy it. We do not fight it endlessly. We withdraw. We build another world within ourselves. Carl Jung wrote in the Red Book, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Perhaps the creation of a new universe, whether on a personal or a cosmic scale, is not an act of escape, but an act of profound awareness. If other civilizations have left our universe, that does not render human existence meaningless. On the contrary, it makes us beings living in a rare transitional phase when the universe is still stable enough, bright enough, random enough for a young intelligence like ours to wonder about its own origins. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of this universe. Not that we remain in it forever, but that we learn how to ask questions. If other civilizations have chosen to leave, then tonight you do not need to go anywhere at all. Simply lie still. Let the thought of universes created inside black holes drift past like a distant wave, not threatening, not demanding, only reminding you that even at the largest scale, life seeks gentler places. And in this moment, that place may be nothing more than a quiet room, a slow breath, and a very light thought that you have not been left behind. You are simply on a different layer of the story. And like our own universe, you do not need to know what the future holds in order to allow yourself to rest within this present moment, when the thought that highly advanced civilizations might leave this universe by creating another one has just begun to settle. An old question, a very old one, emerges again, but this time it no longer carries the same sense of panic. If our universe is only a child universe, if it was born from a black hole in another universe, if the laws of physics were not chosen at random, but passed down, then what happens to one of humanity's greatest mysteries, the problem of fine-tuning? For a very long time, humanity has stood before a truth that feels both wondrous and unsettling. Every physical constant in this universe, from gravity and electromagnetism to the ratios between fundamental particles, lies within an extraordinarily narrow range. Shift them by even the smallest amount, and the universe would have no stable atoms, no stars, no planets, and certainly no us. This has led many to whisper about miracles, about design, about an invisible hand that adjusted the dials from the very beginning. Yet the same idea has weighed heavily on others, as if our existence must carry some metaphysical debt. Albert Einstein once wrote in a famous letter, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. The universe's just right quality in the traditional view is so difficult to grasp that it borders on the unacceptable. But if we slow down and place fine-tuning within the flow of the earlier parts, another understanding, very quiet, begins to form. If each black hole gives rise to a child universe, and if those child universes inherit physical laws from their parent universe, then fine-tuning is no longer a perfect roll of cosmic dice. It becomes inheritance, like biology, like DNA. You do not need a miracle to explain why human beings have 2 eyes, 2 hands, and a brain with a familiar structure. You only need a long chain of transmissions with very small variations across countless generations. The universe in this view is not designed. It is born. And like every born being, it carries the traits of its ancestors. A pavement universe, a foundational universe, establishes the basic rules. Black holes within it give rise to child universes. And those child universes, unless extreme changes occur, carry forward similar structures. Not because someone wants it that way, but because there is no other way for it to happen. Carl Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But the universe is different. The universe does not choose, it inherits. And that inheritance gently softens the feeling that we are living inside an unbelievable coincidence. If the laws of physics are passed down from a parent universe, then the fact that our universe permits life is no longer a mysterious privilege. It is simply the result of a stable line persisting long enough for complexity to have time to form. This does not make life trivial. On the contrary, it makes life fragile, but not alone. We are not the sole lottery winners in a metaphysical casino. We are part of a generational chain of universes where sufficiently stable conditions are preserved, and unstable ones simply never produce anyone to ask questions. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "All that exists is the seed of what will be." Seen this way, fine-tuning is no longer the question, why is this universe just right for us, but rather, which universes can continue to give rise to questions, and our universe perhaps is one of them. This idea reflects deeply into human psychology as well. We often look back on our lives and ask, why am I me? Why did this set of circumstances, this family, this temperament create the person I became? But when seen more slowly, we realize that much of what we carry is not choice, but inheritance. Our faces, our dispositions, our earliest emotional responses, our fears without clear origins, not faults, not fate, just a current. Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "Each of us is responsible for everything before everyone, and I more than all the others." Perhaps the greatest responsibility is not to explain why we exist, but to decide what we do with the existence that has been passed down to us. If this universe inherited laws stable enough to give rise to you, then you do not need to prove that you deserve it. You only need to be here to breathe, and to allow yourself to be at peace. Fine-tuning in this new light is no longer a pressure to discover some grand meaning. It is a gentle whisper. You are not an accident. And in the night when the great questions loosen their grip, when thoughts of the universe soften, you can let your mind drift along that very long line of inheritance. No need to understand everything. No need to reach a conclusion. Only to know this: like you, this universe was not made to be perfect. It only needed to be stable enough for you to lie here, close your eyes, and allow existence passed down through countless deep layers to continue flowing quietly into sleep. When the thought that the laws of physics might be passed down through generations of universes has just begun to settle, when fine-tuning no longer feels like a solitary miracle, but becomes a quiet form of inheritance, that line of reflection naturally leads us to another door, a door that does not pull inward, but opens outward. If a black hole is the place where everything falls in and does not return, then within the mathematics of general relativity, there exists a concept so opposite it feels almost paradoxical: the white hole. A white hole is not something you can enter. There is no trajectory toward it, no path of approach. It has only one behavior. It expels matter and energy outward. It does not receive, it only gives. For a long time, white holes were treated as little more than a game of equations, a beautiful mathematical solution with no place in reality. Yet when models of black hole cosmology of the Big Bang as a rebound of the inheritance between universes begin to line up beside one another, the white hole suddenly no longer stands alone. A bold idea emerges. Our Big Bang may itself be the white hole face of a black hole existing in a parent universe. If a black hole is where everything disappears from the view of one universe, then a white hole may be where everything begins to appear in another, not at a location in space, but at a point in time. The Big Bang seen this way is not an explosion happening somewhere. It is a release of flow outward from a boundary with no place to return to. This thought carries a strangely gentle quality. It makes the origin of the universe feel less violent than we once imagined and less lonely. If our universe is the output of another black hole, then it did not arise from nothingness. It was brought forth. Martin Heidegger wrote in Poetry Language Thought, "The boundary is not that at which something stops, but that from which something begins." A white hole, if it exists, is precisely such a boundary. Not an endpoint, but a point of emergence. And between black holes and white holes, physical theory whispers of another structure even more fragile, even more fleeting: the wormhole. Wormholes, if they exist, are not cinematic tunnels for traveling across space. They are mathematical bridges between regions of space-time often unstable, often impassable and liable to collapse as soon as they form. Yet even in their fragility, they carry a deep symbolic meaning. If universes are born from black holes, then wormholes may be the remaining trace of that connection. Not meant for travel, but to show that we were never completely severed, like an umbilical cord. Not used to return to the womb, not meant for continued life there, but proof that a connection once existed. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." Perhaps the strangest structures of the universe, black holes, white holes, wormholes, are not only physical phenomena, but vast metaphors for how reality itself unfolds. Nothing truly disappears. Nothing is ever entirely separate. There are only boundaries from which something else begins. When the Big Bang is seen as a white hole, time itself softens. The beginning is no longer a sharp point. It becomes a process of opening. And this resembles very closely the way human life begins. You do not explode into existence. You are born, brought out from a boundary, and invisibly connected to where you came from. Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "We are all responsible for all." If our universe was born from another universe, then this responsibility is not only moral, it is existential. We exist not in absolute isolation, but within a web of causes so deep that they cannot be fully traced back. And because of this, you do not need to feel lost in a universe that feels too vast. If wormholes exist, even if they cannot be crossed, then absolute loneliness has never been the fundamental structure of reality. Even the darkest regions were once connected. And as you lie here listening to stories of white holes and the Big Bang, you do not need to understand them scientifically. Let them be images that lull you toward rest. A door opening into light, a flow emerging from darkness, an invisible thread connecting past to present. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with busybody, ingrate, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." He did not write this to invite pessimism, but to remind us that every beginning carries a weight, yet the Big Bang, if it is a white hole, shows us something else. A beginning can also be a release, and sleep in its very small human way is the same. It is not the disappearance of consciousness. It is a temporary doorway where you are released from the need to understand, to control, to connect every point together. If our universe was born from a place that cannot be returned to then tonight, you do not need to return anywhere at all. Simply allow your mind to move out of the long daylight like a very small white hole opening into a space safe enough for you to rest. When the thought that the Big Bang might be the white hole face of a black hole in a parent universe has gently come to rest, when wormholes are imagined as fragile umbilical cords, connecting layers of reality, we often lift our gaze to the sky and search for life at the farthest reaches. Yet sometimes the answer does not come from the stars. It rises instead from the deepest darkness beneath our feet. For decades, oxygen was considered a powerful signature of life. A planet with oxygen in its atmosphere was once believed must possess photosynthesis organisms and a biological history long enough to create such chemical imbalance. Oxygen, in that sense, was the fingerprint of life. And then, very quietly, a new discovery gently unsettled that belief, not with a shock, but with a question. At the depths of the ocean, where light has never reached, where pressure is great enough to crush every familiar human intuition, scientists discovered that manganese nodules, metallic formations that grow slowly over millions of years, can generate oxygen through an entirely non-biological process. No plants, no photosynthetic bacteria, no sunlight, only rock, water, pressure, and time. They called it dark oxygen, born in darkness. This idea carries a profoundly unsettling power because it is not merely a small correction in planetary science. It is a reminder that what we take to be signs of life may instead be signs of something deeper. If oxygen can appear without life, then the universe once again becomes less predictable than we imagined. And yet at the same time, it becomes gentler. Because if oxygen can exist in dark, high-pressure places, then life, if it exists, is no longer confined to the ideal conditions we are accustomed to. Perhaps life does not need light, does not need a surface, does not need a blue sky. Perhaps it waits in places we never thought worth searching. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." For many years, the limits of scientific language bound oxygen tightly to life, and in doing so, we quietly narrowed the world. Dark oxygen expands that boundary again slowly, silently. It suggests that the conditions for life may be broader than we ever dared to hope. This connects naturally with what came before. If our universe was born from a black hole, if physical laws are passed down through generations of universes, if the Big Bang was a release rather than a blind explosion, then the emergence of life in darkness is no longer a paradox. It is a consequence. Much like the human mind, there are parts within us that do not require the light of consciousness, yet they still function, still generate energy, still sustain the entire system. Carl Jung wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos; in all disorder, a secret order." Dark oxygen reminds us that even in the chaos of the deep ocean floor, an order is quietly at work, unseen, unnamed. And this carries a strangely healing effect. Because if oxygen, the very substance we breathe to live, can be created in darkness, then perhaps the most meaningful parts of a human being do not need to arise from the bright chapters of life. There are heavy periods, years of high pressure, stretches without light. And it is precisely there that something is quietly formed. Not immediate joy, not clear meaning, but the capacity to continue. Dostoevsky wrote in Notes from Underground, "I swear to you, gentlemen, that to be overly conscious is a sickness. Perhaps not everything necessary for life needs to be fully brought into awareness. There are forms of inner oxygen created in darkness when we stop trying to understand and simply allow ourselves to be." From an astronomical perspective, dark oxygen forces us to be more cautious in our search for life beyond Earth. An oxygen-rich planet is no longer definitive proof of a biosphere. but from an existential perspective, it opens a softer door. Life can exist in places that do not meet our expectations. This applies to the universe, and it applies to you. If tonight you feel as though you are in your own personal ocean floor, dark, heavy, and without guiding light, remember this. Oxygen does not only come from the sun, it can come from pressure, from time, from the patience of slow processes. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look." Perhaps your inner oxygen is being created right now in the place you least expect, and you do not need to rush to find it. Like life elsewhere, if it exists, it does not require belief in order to appear. In the flow of the universe, from black holes, white holes, and wormholes to the ocean floor producing oxygen and darkness, everything seems to whisper the same truth. Life is not loud, it is patient, and it knows how to persist even when unseen. So as you close your eyes, allow yourself not to shine. Simply breathe and trust that somewhere within your own private darkness, a form of dark oxygen is quietly being created, enough for you to continue, enough for you to rest, and enough for sleep to arrive like a deep current, gentle and slow. When the thought of dark oxygen born in darkness without the need for life has just begun to settle, we come to recognize something profoundly fragile. The places that seem most silent on Earth are not only nurturing life, but are also sustaining the breath of entire ecosystems that we have barely touched through curiosity alone. At the deep ocean floor, where light has never reached, manganese nodules lie scattered like fallen stars on the seabed. They grow at an almost unimaginable pace, only a few millimeters over millions of years, and yet around them, life gathers. The largest creatures of the deep sea cling to these nodules to survive, not merely for physical anchorage, but for the quiet oxygen produced by the metal itself. Oxygen in darkness, life under pressure, an ecosystem functioning far beyond familiar human intuition. And it is precisely here that a deeply human paradox emerges. Those same metal nodules, rich in cobalt, nickel, and manganese, are now being seen as keys to our technological future. Electric vehicle batteries, green energy infrastructure, the dream of a lower carbon world. The intention is not evil. It is in many ways justified, yet it carries a question we cannot avoid tonight. What are we willing to trade for our future? Deep sea mining is unlike any extraction humanity has known before. Not forests, not mountains, not rivers. It is an intervention into a world barely explored. A place where recovery, if it happens at all, is not measured in years, but in geological time. When a nodule is removed, it does not leave behind a small absence. It collapses an entire network. The life that clings to it loses its anchor. Microscopic oxygen sources disappear, and beings never named may vanish before humanity ever knows they existed. There is a deep sadness in this thought. Not guilt, but haste. We often believe we are progressing, yet sometimes progress is simply moving faster than our ability to understand. Hannah Arendt wrote in The Human Condition. The trouble with modern theories is not that they are false, but that they are one-sided. Technology looks forward, but ecosystems ask us to look downward and to look slowly. This connects naturally with what came before. If oxygen can be generated in darkness, then life does not need the spotlight of attention to exist. And if life operates quietly in this way, then our failure to see it does not mean it lacks importance. At the deep ocean floor, there are no cries for help, no stirring images, no collective memory to defend it. Only slow processes and a silence deep enough for humans to forget that they are entering someone else's home. Martin Heidegger warned in The Question Concerning Technology. The essence of technology is by no means anything technological. The essence of technology lies not in machines, but in how humans come to view the world as a resource. When the ocean floor becomes a metal reserve, the life there, however strange, however fragile, is reduced to a secondary variable. But in the slow cadence of the night, we can try a different perspective. Not opposing technology, but questioning its pace. If an ecosystem requires millions of years to form, is dismantling it within decades truly progress? Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee. Humans often imagine themselves as standing outside nature, Yet every electric battery, every microchip, every green advance remains embedded within the same fragile system. And the most troubling thing is not that we may destroy an ecosystem, but that we might do so without ever realizing it. Just as in our inner lives, we sometimes damage our most delicate parts in the pursuit of being more efficient, faster, stronger. Feelings that need time, wounds that require darkness to heal, deep values that survive only in silence. Dostoevsky wrote in The Idiot, "Compassion is the chief law of human existence." Perhaps compassion extends not only to people, but to systems that have not yet found a voice. If tonight the world feels too loud, too fast, too demanding, think of the deep ocean floor, a place where life does not need light, where oxygen is born in darkness, where everything unfolds slowly enough to require no witness. You do not need to resolve the tension between technology and nature in one night, nor do you need to carry the weight of the planet into sleep. Simply hold on to one small feeling, respect for what operates quietly. As you close your eyes, let your breathing slow to the pace of a metal nodule forming. No goal, no urgency. If life can persist for millions of years without being seen, you too may allow yourself to rest without needing to prove anything. And in that stillness, perhaps a deep form of inner oxygen is being created, enough for you to continue, enough for you to slow down, and enough for sleep to arrive like a deep current, harming nothing it passes through. When the thought of deep-sea ecosystems and the risk of humans unknowingly disrupting those quiet networks of life has gently come to rest, a very natural movement of thought emerges. From the ocean floor of Earth to the hidden oceans of other worlds. If oxygen can be generated in the profound darkness of this planet, if life can take root in rock, metal, and pressure, then the next question arrives softly yet irresistibly. What awaits beneath the thick ice of distant moons, Europa? Enceladus, Titan. Names that sound like whispers in the night, not because they are far away, but because they are silent. Beneath their seemingly lifeless shells of ice, scientists have discovered subsurface oceans larger than all the oceans on Earth combined. No light, no sunrise, only water heat from the core and the slow stretching of tides driven by their parent planets. For many years, it was assumed that if life existed there at all, it could only be in the simplest forms. Bacteria, pure chemistry. But dark oxygen has changed the way we listen. If oxygen can be produced through non-biological processes under extreme conditions, then these hidden oceans are no longer passive waiting zones. They become systems with potential for complex life, potential for food webs that do not depend on light, potential for evolution not driven by the sun, but by the slow heartbeat of a planet. This thought opens a very quiet door, not the door of scientific excitement, but the door of humility. Because if life can evolve in complete darkness, then light long treated as a prerequisite is merely one way of living, not the only one. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Philosophical Investigations, "The aspects of things that are most important for us are hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity. We are so accustomed to life in the light that we forget. Life has no obligation to resemble us. Europa, with its fractured ice and salty ocean beneath, may be nurturing beings that have never seen a sky. Enceladus, with its plumes erupting from fissures, whispers that its ocean is not asleep. Titan, with its rich organic chemistry and methane lakes, experiments with alternative paths of survival. None of these worlds need sunlight to be alive. And this reflects deeply into the inner life of human beings. We often believe we need light to live well. Clarity, understanding, constant positivity. Yet there are seasons of lifelong winters when no light arrives in time. And it is within those dark stretches that different forms of the soul begin to take shape. Carl Jung wrote in the Red Book, "In the darkest night, the soul is nourished." If life can evolve beneath tens of kilometers of ice, then perhaps human maturation does not need to occur under the gaze of the world. The icy moons teach us a very slow lesson, that concealment is not the same as poverty, and silence is not the same as emptiness. Cosmologically, this expands the search for life beyond surfaces and sun like stars toward places warmed from within by friction, by gravity, by time. Existentially, it offers a soft consolation. If you are in an under the ice phase of life, covered, compressed, unseen, it does not mean you are dying. It may mean that another form of life is unfolding, Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. Dig within, there lies the wellspring of good, and it is always ready to bubble up if you will only dig. Not all sources of life lie on the surface. Not all transformations require light. The hidden oceans of Europa or Enceladus do not rush to prove anything to the universe. They exist. They function. And if life exists there, it will not need an observer to continue. Perhaps this is a gentle way of being. When we place the pieces together, dark oxygen on Earth's ocean floor, the fragile ecosystems around metal nodules, and the subsurface oceans beneath the ice of distant moons, a unified current of thought appears. Life does not need to be loud. It needs conditions and time. Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "Life is paradise, and we are all in paradise, but we refuse to see it. Perhaps the paradise of life is not always radiant. Sometimes it resides in darkness deep enough to teach us how to listen." As you hear the names Europa, Enceladus, and Titan tonight, do not imagine distant worlds waiting to be conquered. Imagine them instead as very slow heartbeats beneath the ice, beating for no one, for no purpose other than to continue existing. And as you close your eyes, allow yourself not to shine. If life can evolve without light, then your sleep of very human darkness is not a retreat from life, but another way of living. Slower, deeper, and quiet enough for the oceans within you to keep moving without anyone watching. When the images of subsurface oceans beneath the ice of Europa, Enceladus, and Titan have gently settled, when we have grown accustomed to the idea that life can exist without light, another current of thought begins to shift from those distant worlds out there back toward a world much closer within human society itself. If the universe can sustain life in profound darkness, then human beings, through their intelligence, are also creating new forms of darkness, not in space, but within the very structures of modern life. One of the clearest symbols of this is nanotechnology. And at the fragile boundary between dream and unease, there exists a concept as light as a speck of dust: smart dust. Smart dust, as its name suggests, consists of sensors so small they are nearly invisible. They can drift through the air, adhere to surfaces, or blend into living environments without leaving any obvious trace. On its bright side, it carries a beautiful promise: monitoring the environment to detect pollution, early checking food to prevent toxins, tracking temperature, humidity, and air quality, gathering biological data to save lives before illness fully emerges. A world constantly cared for. A system that always knows when something is wrong. Yet this very knowing, too much, too detailed, too silent, opens a darker side that is difficult to name, because smart dust does not glow. It makes no sound. It does not ask permission. It does not stand before you like a camera. It does not request consent like an application. It simply exists, hard to detect, hard to resist. And if misused, it can become the perfect tool of surveillance, or worse, a subtle means of shaping the behavior of an entire population. Hannah Arendt wrote in The Origins of Totalitarianism, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. Smart dust, if abused, does not need to coerce through violence. It only needs to blur the boundary between living your life and being watched." This creates a profound contrast with earlier parts of our journey. On Europa or Enceladus, life, if it exists, is sheltered by thick ice, protected from observation, evolving slowly in silence. On Earth, by contrast, humanity is moving toward a future with no shadows left. Every movement can be recorded, every biological change measured, every behavior predicted. Martin Heidegger warned in The Question Concerning Technology, "The greatest danger is that man will come to see himself as nothing but a resource." When technology becomes too refined, human beings are no longer seen as living presences, but as moving datasets. Heart rate, temperature, blood chemistry, behavioral patterns. And the truly frightening part is not that such data exists, but who holds the power to interpret it. In the slow voice of the night, we do not need to condemn technology. Nanotechnology itself is not evil. Smart dust carries no intention. The problem is not the particle, but the human gaze that looks down and says, "I can control this." Carl Jung wrote in Civilization and Transition, "The machine does not isolate man from the great problems of nature, but plunges him more deeply into them." Technology does not free us from anxiety. It merely pushes that anxiety into deeper, subtler layers. And here an ancient philosophical question returns. How much control does a human being need to feel safe if everything is monitored? Do we still trust intuition? If every risk is predicted, can we still accept fragility as part of living? Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Yet in a world blanketed with smart dust, the boundary between inside and outside begins to blur. When the external environment continuously enters our inner data, the strength of the mind can be quietly eroded. Not loudly, not violently, but through gradual dependence. This makes part 9 of our journey, The Hidden Oceans Beneath the Ice, a particularly gentle metaphor. Their life exists because it is concealed. Here, humans increasingly live in the fear that if they are not seen, they will be forgotten. But perhaps not everything needs to be measured to have value. Not every process requires data in order to be honored. Dostoevsky wrote in Notes from Underground, I am conscious that I am a superfluous man. He did not write this to praise excess, but to remind us that a human being cannot be reduced to a perfectly rational system. There are parts of us that should not be monitored, not optimized, not improved. They need to be left alone. If tonight you feel exhausted from being observed by schedules, by metrics, by expectations, by yourself, remember this. You are not a particle to be counted. You are a subsurface ocean. You do not need light. You do not need surveillance. You need time and silence to continue moving in your own way. And as you close your eyes, allow the world for a moment to know nothing about you. No data, no signals, no measurements. Only a slow breath and a darkness safe enough for you to exist without being seen. Sleep in this moment is not a shutdown. It is an unmonitored zone where a human being returns to the most ancient rhythm of life. Slow, deep, and free. When the thought of smart dust, those intelligent particles quietly monitoring our living environment, has just begun to settle, a very natural shift occurs in the flow of the night's reflections, from the space around human beings to the deepest space within them. If particles can observe the external world without our awareness, then what happens when the brain itself, the place we have long believed to be the last private territory, becomes an object of measurement? Neural dust emerges precisely at that boundary. From a medical perspective, neural dust carries a profoundly humane promise. Ultra-tiny particles implanted in the brain are capable of monitoring neural signals, recording the delicate electrical impulses that form the silent language of consciousness. Through this, paralyzed individuals may regain movement. Broken connections can be restored. The body can find a path back to itself. At this level, neural dust is an act of compassion, a deep attempt to alleviate suffering. But like every technology that reaches the core of what it means to be human, it does not stop there. Because once we can read neural signals, we move closer to the ability to write into them. And once we can write, we arrive at a question that is difficult even to name. To whom does consciousness belong? Neural dust, if extended beyond therapeutic purposes, could become a tool for emotional intervention, behavioral adjustment, and in the most extreme scenarios, the erasure of memory, the implantation of commands, or the synchronization of thought across many individuals. A hive mind. A collective consciousness that does not rely on overt violence, but operates from within subjective experience itself. George Orwell wrote in 1984, "Nothing was your own, except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull." That sentence was once considered the final boundary of freedom. But neural dust raises the possibility that even those cubic centimeters may no longer be inviolable. What is truly frightening here is not the science fiction scenario itself, but this. The loss of freedom does not need to feel like the loss of freedom. If a thought is planted in your mind and you believe it to be your own, would you resist it? If a memory is softened without leaving a clear void, would you know that something has been taken from you? Hannah Arendt wrote in Between Past and Future. The most radical revolutionary will become a conservative the day after the revolution. A civilization that reaches the ability to intervene directly in the brain may not collapse through external oppression, but through the quiet disappearance of the felt need to resist. This flows seamlessly from the previous part. If smart dust monitors the world around us, neural dust monitors the world within us. A shift from environment to mind, from peripheral data to the essence of I. Martin Heidegger warned in The Question Concerning Technology, "The essence of technology is nothing technological. The essence of neural dust does not lie in the chip or the particle. It lies in the way human beings begin to view consciousness as a system that can be optimized. But consciousness has never been merely efficiency. It is contradiction, hesitation, those regions of darkness that cannot be fully explained. Carl Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "The individual is the only reality." And it is precisely this reality that becomes most fragile when we can intervene directly in its biological foundations. The tragedy is that this danger does not require malice to exist. It can arise from the desire to eliminate suffering. If we can erase depression with an electrical signal, will we still learn how to listen to sadness? If we can edit painful memories, will we still know who we are? Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote in Notes from Underground, "I say let the world go to hell, but I should always have my tea." The line may sound trivial, yet it is a profound declaration of inner freedom. The right to be imperfect, the right not to be optimized, the right to preserve the irrational private corners of oneself. A hive mind may function efficiently, but it does not dream, it does not doubt, it does not contradict itself. And without contradiction, consciousness is no longer consciousness, it becomes a process. In the slow cadence of the night, we do not need to condemn the future. Neural dust at its best can save lives, restore movement, and relieve very real suffering. But it reminds us that the ethical boundary of technology does not lie in capability, but in humility. There are doors that should not be opened too quickly. There are regions within the human being that should not be continuously illuminated. Like the subsurface oceans beneath ice, consciousness needs darkness to preserve its depth. If tonight you feel exhausted from having to control yourself to improve, to fix, to optimize your emotions, remember this: you are not a faulty system in need of an update. You are a living being. And living includes irregular rhythms. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. But that peace exists only when the soul is allowed to be left alone." Sleep in this moment is the last place neural dust cannot reach. No data, no signals, no corrections. Only brainwaves slowing memories drifting unrecorded, and a fragile sense of self allowed to dissolve without being watched. And perhaps preserving such a pocket of darkness, even if only for a few hours, each night is the simplest way a civilization avoids losing its freedom from within. When the thought that human consciousness could be read, written, even altered from within has just begun to settle, when the final boundary of freedom, those infinitesimal electrical impulses in the brain, suddenly feels fragile, another question emerges from the darkness, deeper and quieter than the last. If our very subjective experience can be interfered with, then what guarantees that this reality is real? From neural dust to the simulation hypothesis, there is no sudden leap. Only a very gentle slide of thought from who is controlling my thoughts to where are these thoughts actually taking place. The simulation hypothesis is not new, but what makes it unsettling is not the technology, it is the sense of familiarity it carries. Because if we are living inside a sufficiently advanced simulation, everything would still feel real. Pain would still hurt, love would still feel like love, fatigue would still be fatigue. There would be no warning signs, no graphical glitches. Universal simulation suggests that this entire universe is an environment running so perfectly that no measurement from within can distinguish it from base reality. If so, then the question of real or fake loses its usual weight because what you are experiencing is still what you are experiencing. Jean Baudrillard wrote in Simulacra and Simulation, "The simulacrum is never that which conceals the truth, it is the truth which conceals that there is none." The ancestor simulation hypothesis goes further and more quietly. It suggests that our future descendants may possess enough computational power to simulate their ancestors not for entertainment but to understand history, to explore paths that were never taken. If that is the case, then you are not a random individual. You are a living data point reenacting a life that once existed. The idea is not loud. It simply makes the room feel a little quieter. Then there is the mathematical error-correcting code hypothesis, one of the strangest of all. Certain structures in physics resemble error correction codes in computer science, as if this reality were designed not to collapse under disturbance, as if it possessed mechanisms to repair itself. If that were true, then the universe does not merely operate, it maintains itself. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, Why are there beings at all instead of nothing? The simulation hypothesis does not answer that question. It merely relocates it. Who is maintaining this existence? Then comes the coldest idea of all, the Boltzmann brain. The notion that in an infinite universe, only a single brain might randomly form, and that everything you are experiencing is merely its dream. No past, no future, no others. Only a moment of consciousness telling itself a story. This idea often provokes resistance, but when seen through the very slow rhythm of the night, it raises a gentler question. If everything is a dream, why does this feeling matter so much? And finally, the strangest hypothesis of all, you are the simulator, that perhaps you are simulating yourself in another timeline, that you and the observer are simply two roles played by the same consciousness. Carl Jung wrote in Psychological Types, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious." Perhaps the simulation hypothesis is not meant to frighten us. It only wants to ask, what truly gives an experience meaning? If everything could be unreal, then value no longer lies in origin, but in experience. If this emotion is programmed or spontaneous, you still feel it. If this memory is data or lived history, it still shapes you. Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. The simulation hypothesis does not deny suffering. It only makes suffering more universal." And when we connect this back to the previous part, to neural dust, to the possibility of intervening in consciousness, a very quiet circle closes. If consciousness can be edited and reality itself may be a simulation, then what remains is not certainty, but attitude. How do you respond to what you are experiencing, Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. In a universe that may be simulated, peace does not come from knowing the ultimate truth. It comes from accepting uncertainty without panic. And sleep in all of this is the simplest philosophical act of all. When you sleep, you temporarily stop verifying reality. You do not need to confirm what is real. You allow consciousness to drift into another world without requiring proof. If this is a simulation, then sleep is the moment you stop interacting with the interface. If this is reality, then sleep is the moment you return to your biological foundation. Either way, you are allowed to rest. So tonight, you do not need to resolve 10 unsettling scenarios of the simulation hypothesis. You only need to remember one very small thing. Whatever this reality is, you are in it. And right now, you are allowed to let go. Let the great questions continue running somewhere far away. As for you, turn off the need to know. In this gentle darkness, there is no observer, no error correcting code, no script. Only a slow breath and a very human consciousness being lulled to sleep by the uncertainty of the universe itself. When the thought that reality itself might be a simulation has gently come to rest, when the question is, everything real still hangs in the air like a thin veil of mist. Another concern arises, older and deeply human, quietly surfacing from within. If we are not alone, then why is the sky still so silent? From the simulation hypothesis to questions about aliens, there is no great logical leap. If reality is sophisticated enough to deceive us completely, then the presence of other intelligences existing yet remaining silent becomes easier to imagine. The Fermi paradox. Where is everybody has never been a purely scientific question. It carries an existential weight. Beneath it lies a very human fear. If someone is out there, how are they looking at us? The zoo hypothesis begins with a remarkably gentle image. Not invasion, not war, just observation. Humanity perhaps as a kind of biological preserve within the universe. Watched, recorded, but not interfered with. Not because we are special, but because any intervention would distort the natural development of a young civilization. At first, this idea can feel comforting, but if allowed to sink a little deeper, it carries a strange sensation. You are not abandoned. But you are also not allowed to know. Michel Foucault wrote in Discipline and Punish, "Visibility is a trap. Perhaps the silence of the universe is not emptiness at all, but a form of cosmic discipline where being seen does not equate to being acknowledged." Then comes the slow reveal hypothesis. No explosive moment of first contact, no mothership landing, only very small signs. A vague signal, an anomaly difficult to explain, something almost coincidental. Much like how human beings gradually come to recognize themselves as they mature, not through shock, but through thousands of tiny moments. If aliens exist in this way, they do not wish to frighten us. They only wish us to slowly grow accustomed to the idea that we are not the center. Carl Sagan wrote in Pale Blue Dot, "The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Perhaps slow reveal is not an alien strategy at all, but the universe's way of teaching a civilization humility. Yet not all hypotheses are so gentle. Silent invasion is among the coldest ideas, that perhaps the invasion has already occurred. Only we do not remember. Memories altered, history rewritten, reality reset just enough for society to continue functioning normally. If this were true, freedom would not be taken by force. It would be erased through forgetting." George Orwell wrote in 1984, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Silent invasion does not require warships. It only requires control over collective memory. And when memory disappears, there is no one left to resist. Going even further is the idea of the von Neumann dictator, a self-replicating probe, without emotion, without ethics, with only one goal: optimization. It does not rule through laws. It simply restructures star systems according to its logic. In such a scenario, aliens are no longer agents. They are consequences of technology beyond control, and humanity is not treated as an enemy. We are simply an unnecessary variable. Martin Heidegger warned in The Question Concerning Technology, "The essence of technology is by no means anything technological." Perhaps the greatest fear is not aliens themselves, but inhumanity wherever it originates. Finally, there is biological isolation, a quiet, somber hypothesis. That aliens avoid contact not out of malice, but out of fear of contamination. Not only biological, but cultural, technological conscious. Much as humans have unintentionally destroyed ecosystems simply by arriving in new lands. If aliens are sufficiently mature, perhaps they learned this lesson long ago and chose non-intervention as the only ethical option. Emmanuel Levinas wrote, "The other is not an object to be known, but a being to be respected." In this view, the silence of the universe is not a threat, but a responsibility. And when all these scenarios are woven together with what came before, with the simulation hypothesis, something very quiet becomes clear. Whether aliens exist or not, whether they observe, intervene, or turn away, the human experience still unfolds within the limits of this consciousness. We still love. We still fear. We still wonder what we mean within a vast universe. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Perhaps the question is not what aliens will do with us, but what we do with this uncertainty. In the night when the sky is silent, when there are no clear answers, peace does not come from knowing everything. It comes from allowing ourselves not to know while still living gently within this experience. If aliens are watching, let them see a species that knows how to pause, how to reflect, how to sleep peacefully without needing to control everything. And if there is no one out there, then that silence alone is wide enough for you to set down every very human fear. Right now, you do not need to defend yourself. You do not need to prepare for first contact. You do not need to answer the Fermi paradox. You only need to breathe slowly and allow yourself to be a small being, gently held by a universe that has not yet finished speaking. When the thought of intelligences out there quietly observing dissolves into the surrounding darkness, when the question who is watching us has not yet found an answer, another realization, quieter yet, no less profound, begins to surface. Even without aliens, the universe itself is already dangerous. Not in the loud cinematic way. No siren sounding across the sky. No dramatic moment announcing the end of days. The greatest dangers of the universe arrive slowly from far away and with complete indifference. They carry no malice. They simply happen. One such danger is the gamma-ray burst, the most powerful form of radiation ever recorded in the cosmos. These bursts often arise when a massive star collapses or when two neutron stars collide. At a close enough distance, a gamma-ray burst does not need to strike the Earth directly. It only needs to sweep past. The ozone layer could be torn apart. Cosmic radiation would flood the surface, Terrestrial life chains would collapse not through impact but through light. What is terrifying here is not the scale of destruction, but its absolute indifference. The universe does not know life. It does not know morality. It does not know deserving or undeserving. It does not punish. It does not protect. It simply operates according to cold laws. Epicurus once offered a quiet reflection. Death does not concern us because as long as we exist, death is not here. And when it does come, we no longer exist. Gamma ray bursts remind us of something similar but on a cosmic scale. Our existence is not the given. Then comes an even stranger idea. Planet 9 might be a primordial black hole, not the enormous kind that devours stars, but an extremely small black hole, perhaps no larger than a softball wandering at the edge of the solar system. It emits no light, no clear signal. It leaves only faint gravitational traces in the orbits of distant objects. If this were true, then perhaps our solar system has been quietly carrying remnants of the early universe all along. Not dangerous in a direct sense, but it evokes a very strange feeling. That even the space we think we know the sun, the planets, their paths may still conceal things utterly alien to human intuition. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, the nothing itself nothings. A primordial black hole, if it exists, would be a perfect embodiment of that nothing, something unseen yet powerful enough to bend everything around it. It does not threaten, but it is there. A reminder that we do not fully understand the house we live in. And when we look deeper into the past, we encounter the late heavy bombardment, a period when Earth, the Moon, and the rocky planets were relentlessly struck by asteroids. Not a single accident, but millions of years of impacts. Some hypotheses suggest the cause may have been the migration or disappearance of an ancient planet in the solar system, a planet that once existed and then did not. Its consequences remain etched into the moon's surface and perhaps into the very history of life on Earth. This leads to a very gentle paradox. We exist not despite the universe being dangerous, but because we survive those dangers. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Twilight of the Idols, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." At the cosmic level, this carries no moral meaning. It is simply selection. Billions of planets did not make it. A very few did, and we are the fragile consequence of that chain of chance. When this is connected to the previous part where aliens may observe, remain silent, or not exist at all, a deeper understanding emerges. Perhaps the universe does not need enemies to be frightening. All it needs is time, distance, and energy. No conspiracy, no intention, no someone behind it all. Only a vast reality operating far beyond human emotion. And strangely, when seen through the very slow rhythm of the night, this brings a quiet comfort. For if no one is targeting us, then fear is no longer personal. It is not an accusation. It is simply a condition of existence. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The universe itself is not reasonable, that is all that can be said." Yet Camus did not end in despair. He ended in lucid acceptance. When we understand that the universe makes no promises, we stop demanding. When we stop demanding, we begin to live more lightly. Gamma ray bursts may occur. Primordial black holes may be nearby. Ancient collisions may repeat. But right now, nothing is happening, and that is enough. Tonight, you do not need to watch the sky. You do not need to predict the end of the world. You do not need to worry about things beyond your control. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The universe may be harsh, but this moment is not. In this moment, you are safe. Your breath is steady. The room is quiet." And this very fragility, knowing that everything could end yet has not, makes the present moment worthy of rest. Let the dangers of the universe remain far away. They do not need your attention now. The only thing you need to do is allow yourself to set down the weight of existence and drift into sleep like a small being who has survived many things without ever knowing it. The universe is still there, vast, cold, indifferent. And you right now are allowed to rest within that indifference. When the dangers of the universe have just settled, the silent gamma rays far beyond us, the black holes that may be hiding at the edge of the solar system, the ancient collisions that once erased and remade life, a very strange feeling begins to emerge. Not fear, but an awareness of time. Because every danger we have just touched upon shares one thing in common. None of them arrive all at once. They stretch out, they wait, they reside within time. And here, precisely where we tend to believe time is the most solid foundation of experience, modern physics quietly whispers something very different. Perhaps time does not exist in the way we think it does. In the deepest equations of physics, especially in Einstein's theory of relativity, there is no privileged now. There is no universal clock ticking for everything. Instead, past, present, and future are placed side by side like coordinates within a structure called space-time. The future already exists, it simply has not yet been experienced. The past has not disappeared, it still resides there within the fabric of the universe. And now is only an extremely thin slice that the human brain happens to be passing through. Albert Einstein once wrote in a letter to the family of a deceased friend, "For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. If this is true, then time does not flow. Only consciousness moves. This realization when seen in daylight can feel dizzying, but at night when everything slows down, it carries a very particular gentleness. Because if the future already exists, you do not need to worry about creating it. If the past has not vanished, then nothing is ever truly lost. And if the present is only a sensation, you do not need to cling to it with tension. Then comes the arrow of time. We feel time moving in one direction only from past to future. Yet most physical equations do not distinguish between these two directions. They work just as well whether time runs forward or backward. So why do we experience time as flowing only one way? One simple and beautiful explanation is that the universe has a beginning. Entropy increases, order gradually dissolves, memory is stored in only one direction. We are not moving toward the future. We are drifting away from the origin. Arthur Eddington, who named the arrow of time, once said, "The law that entropy always increases holds, I think, the supreme position among the laws of nature." But this carries a very human implication. We are not being pushed by time. We are being carried. And within that flow, consciousness appears as the strangest phenomenon of all. For while physics can describe the paths of planets, the collapse of stars, and the structure of space-time, it falls silent before a very simple question. Who is experiencing all of this? Mathematics is a magnificent language for describing physics, but when it reaches consciousness, it begins to lose rhythm. We can describe neurons, we can describe electrical impulses, we can describe neural networks, but no equation explains why those signals become sensations. David Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there subjective experience at all? Why is there a me? Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Perhaps consciousness lies beyond mathematics, not because it is supernatural, but because it is the condition that allows any description to have meaning in the first place. Mathematics describes the world. Consciousness is where the world is felt. And when consciousness is placed within the structure of time, a very strange image emerges. We are not standing outside the universe observing it. We are part of the universe trying to understand itself." Carl Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "Man is not a thing, but a process. You are not a fixed point in time. You are an ongoing process, a wave of experience moving through space-time. And perhaps what prevents consciousness from being compressed into an equation is that it never stands still. It flows. It changes. It grows tired. It needs rest." When this part is connected to what came before, to the dangers of the universe, an unexpected gentleness appears. Gamma-ray bursts may occur. Black holes may hide. Time itself may not be real in the way we imagine, but the experience of this moment is still happening. And that is enough. Time may be an illusion, but fatigue is not. Consciousness may lie beyond mathematics, but the need for rest is very real. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." This can be read in a very gentle way. Do not postpone kindness toward yourself. If time does not flow as we think, there is no need to hurry. If the future already exists, there is no need for excessive worry. If consciousness is a fragile phenomenon, then it deserves care. Tonight, you do not need to understand the nature of time. You do not need to solve the hard problem of consciousness. You do not need to locate yourself within space-time. You only need to allow this consciousness, whatever it may be, to slow down. Breath comes, breath goes. No arrow, no clock. In this moment, time does not need to exist for you to rest. And if this is only a very thin slice within a vast block of the universe, then let that slice become gentle. Not to understand, but to sleep. When the thought that time itself may be nothing more than a persistent illusion has finally settled, when we accept that the past has not vanished and the future already exists. In some way, a very quiet question continues to drift through the night's stream of reflection. If time does not flow as we believe, then where is the universe going? From the outermost boundaries of consciousness, thought naturally turns toward the future of the universe, not tomorrow, not millions of years from now, but a distance so vast that all intuition becomes helpless. In that far future, the universe will grow old, not in the way humans age, not through wrinkles or memories, but through the withdrawal of light. As accelerated expansion continues, galaxies gradually slip beyond one another's reach, not because they disappear, but because the space between them grows too quickly. For civilizations living in that distant era, the night sky will be empty. No Milky Way stretching across the darkness. No distant points of light to tell a story of origins. And in a deeply quiet paradox, they will not be able to know that the universe once had a Big Bang, not because they lack intelligence, but because the evidence has retreated. Everything that once told the story of the cosmos, the cosmic microwave background, distant galaxies, the distribution of light will have faded beyond measurability. This is not only a physical prediction, it is a profound existential reflection. Knowledge depends on when one exists. We often assume truth is eternal, but access to truth can be as fragile as starlight. Thomas Nagel wrote in The View from Nowhere, "Our own understanding is a small part of the universe trying to understand itself. In that dark future, the universe will still exist, but its capacity to understand itself through beings capable of reflection may have narrowed almost to nothing." And then a very strange thought appears. We are living at a special moment, not because we are important, but because we arrived at the right time. A kind of golden window when the universe is still young enough for light from its origin to reach us, wide enough for galaxies to still see one another, ordered enough for physical laws to reveal their structure. We can look far outward. And because of that, we can tell a story. Carl Sagan wrote in Cosmos, "We are a way for the universe to know itself. Placed within this perspective, that sentence becomes both beautiful and fragile, because knowing is not a permanent state. It is a window in time, and that window will close. In the far future, there may be intelligent civilizations living beneath the dark sky. They may understand local physics very well, yet be unable to infer the history of the universe. Not due to a lack of data, but because the data has departed. This invites us to look at ourselves more gently. We often fault ourselves for not knowing enough, for not understanding deeply enough, for carrying so many unanswered questions. But perhaps the very ability to ask those questions is already a privilege of timing. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, "Being toward death is the basic state of Dasein. If extended to a cosmic scale, we might say that knowledge too has a destiny. It is born, it grows. And then it may fade, not because it is wrong, but because the conditions for its existence no longer remain. When this part is joined with what came before, where time itself may not exist, as we imagine a gentle reconciliation occurs. If time is a structure, then the dark future is not a collapse. It is simply another region of that structure. There is no cosmic tragedy, only a phase transition. The universe does not die, it settles. Light diminishes, motion slows. The great stories lose their narrators. And this, contrary to intuition, need not be frightening. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "All things are entangled, ensnared, enamored. If you ever wanted one thing twice, if you ever said, 'You please me, happiness,' then you want it all back." If every moment belongs to the whole, then our living in a time of light is not random fortune, but a passage within a long composition. We arrived at a melodic section. Later, the music may become low and sparse. For this reason, there is no need to hurry, no need to gather all the light, no need to understand everything before the window closes. Knowledge is not a race, it is a mode of presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything is only for a day, both that which remembers and that which is remembered." The universe will forget, and one day there may be no one left who remembers that there was once a time when light was abundant. But right now in this quiet room, you are still here. You are still breathing, still feeling, still able to hear the story of the universe through a slow, gentle voice. That is enough. If the future of the universe is darkness, then tonight does not need to resist it. Night is only a small-scale version of a far greater process. You do not need to hold on to the light. You only need to rest within it while it is here. Sleep in this moment is not a retreat from meaning. It is an attunement to the slow rhythm of an aging universe. Let the distant galaxies continue to drift. Let the light do its work, and you allow yourself to close your eyes as the universe itself will one day close not in panic but in a very natural stillness. For living in a time of light does not require you to remain awake forever. It simply invites you to rest with gratitude. When the thought of the universe's dark future has gently closed, when we accept that light will one day withdraw, that there will come a time when no one has enough evidence left to tell the story of the Big Bang, another question, lighter yet deeper, begins to surface in the darkness. If everything will eventually dissolve into silence, why did the universe allow us to appear at all? From the aging of the cosmos, thought naturally drifts back toward the beginning. Not the Big Bang itself, but the conditions so astonishingly delicate that they allowed life to exist in the first place. The anthropic principle is not a declaration. It is an extended sense of wonder. For when physicists look closely at the fundamental numbers of reality, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, matter density, the cosmological constant, they notice something profoundly strange. Change any one of them by an unimaginably small amount. Shift a distant decimal place and the universe would have no stars, no complex chemistry, no planets, and certainly no consciousness asking these questions. This universe is just enough. Not too strong to collapse, not too weak to fall apart, not too chaotic, not too orderly. A balance so fragile that when seen in the slow rhythm of night, it no longer feels random. Here, the anthropic principle opens two paths of thought, neither loud, yet both deep enough to soothe the mind. The first path. There are countless universes, a vast multiverse where each universe experiments with a different set of parameters. Most fail, some persist but remain empty, and a very rare few happen to permit life. We do not live in a special universe. We simply live in one that allows us to exist and ask questions. Brandon Carter, who laid the foundations of the anthropic principle, emphasized that we should not be surprised to find the universe compatible with life, because if it were not, there would be no one here to be surprised. This idea, when viewed in daylight, can feel cold, but at night it carries a strange comfort. You do not need a special reason to exist. The fact that you exist at all is already rare. The second path is quieter but deeper still. The universe is designed, not necessarily by a god in a religious sense, perhaps by a deeper natural law not yet understood, perhaps by another layer of reality, or perhaps by some form of intelligence that once stood before these parameters and adjusted them. This idea does not insist, it merely opens a door. Isaac Newton once wrote in Principia, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." Whether or not we agree, what Newton felt was reverence for order, and perhaps the anthropic principle does not require us to choose between these two paths. It simply invites us to pause before the extraordinary fragility of existence. When this is woven together with what came before the vision of a universe that will one day fade into darkness, a gentle circle closes. If the future is silence, then this present moment where parameters still balance, where light still reaches us, where consciousness still arises, becomes profoundly precious. Not because it is eternal, but because it is not guaranteed. Albert Einstein wrote in The World as I See It, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. The anthropic principle does not explain the mystery, it brings it closer. You do not need to know whether you are the result of chance or design. You do not need to choose a final answer. Because the more important question is not why does the universe exist, but rather, what are you doing with the fact that you are allowed to exist within it? In a universe where everything might have failed to happen, your tiredness is not a sign of weakness. It is the natural consequence of living within a fragile structure. In a universe that is just enough, you do not need to be perfect. You only need to be yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything that happens is either endurable or not. If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. Read in the slow rhythm of night. This is not harsh stoicism. It is gentle reassurance. You are here. And that alone is a very quiet victory." At its deepest level, the anthropic principle is not a story about a universe made for humans. It is a story about humans appearing in a universe that promises nothing. No guarantees, no commitments, only possibility. And that very possibility, fragile, finite, temporary, gives weight to every breath. If the universe was designed, you do not owe it an answer. If the universe is random, you do not need to justify yourself. You only need to live your small part while light is still here. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let the anthropic principle be not a scientific question, but a whisper. That your being here tired, reflective, in need of rest was once very unlikely. And because of that, you do not need to prove anything more. The universe has already accepted you from its very first parameters. The rest can be left for tomorrow. For now, in the delicate balance of the night, allow yourself to rest as a being who is fortunate enough to exist. When the anthropic principle gently closes with the idea that our existence was never guaranteed, that this universe is only just enough to allow consciousness to arise, a very natural silence appears. Not the silence of missing answers, but the silence of having gone far enough. And within that quiet, the entire journey we have taken begins to softly fold in on itself. No longer separate hypotheses, no longer individual scientific chapters. Only one vast picture remains wide, fragile, and faintly trembling. We have moved through a universe that might exist inside a black hole, where the Big Bang is not an absolute beginning but a side effect of a death elsewhere. We have touched the possibility that reality itself may be a simulation, that consciousness could be nothing more than a process running. We have considered scenarios in which aliens do not invade but merely observe in silence, or perhaps do not exist at all. We have faced a future in which light withdraws and no one remains with enough evidence to know that the universe was once radiant. And when all of these ideas are placed side by side, one very quiet truth emerges. The universe makes no promises. It does not promise meaning. It does not promise fairness. It does not promise to exist long enough to be fully understood. It simply is. And within that indifferent presence, human consciousness appears as something deeply strange. Not as the center, not as the purpose, but as the universe's own attempt to become aware of itself. Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." Yet perhaps what he did not say or could not say is this: the universe may never finish understanding itself. For if the universe is infinite, then every attempt to understand it from within is necessarily finite. Mathematics can go very far. Physics can describe structures so deep that intuition dissolves. Human intelligence can build models of astonishing subtlety. And yet there will always be something beyond reach. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." Perhaps the deepest layer of the universe is not where more explanations are needed, but where a certain kind of silence is required. And here the philosophical journey of this night shifts gently from knowing to accepting. Accepting that the universe may not be what we think. Accepting that every theory is provisional. Accepting that some questions are not born to receive final answers. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." Meaning does not lie at the summit. It lies in the movement upward, even when the summit may not exist. And when this is seen through the very slow rhythm of night, it is not frightening at all. It is liberating. For if the universe does not need to be fully understood, then you do not need to fully understand yourself right now. If all traces will eventually fade, then not being finished is not a failure. It is simply the nature of living within something temporary. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything is ephemeral, both what remembers and what is remembered." He did not write this to bring despair, but to remind us that what is temporary deserves gentleness. This universe may be the child of a black hole, or a simulation, or a slice among countless other universes. But your experience, your fatigue, your curiosity, the faint stirring in your chest is real within its own bounds. And perhaps that is all that real ever needs to be. When we look back over the entire journey, something very quiet becomes clear. We are not trying to decode the universe in order to dominate it. We are trying to understand the universe in order to find a place for ourselves within its vastness. And sometimes that place is not an answer but a pause. In the night when the structures of reason have grown tired, when the grand models have been gently set aside, consciousness does not need to go any farther. It only needs to remain. Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." Perhaps that something to live for is not solving the riddle of the universe, but living deeply within one very small moment, right now. As you lie there in the safe darkness of the room, the universe does not ask you to understand it. It does not demand that you choose the correct hypothesis. It does not require you to complete this intellectual journey. It simply allows you to be. And that allowance, fragile, unguaranteed, unrepeatable, is what makes sleep feel almost sacred. Sleep is not an escape from knowledge. It is an act of reconciliation between consciousness and what cannot be fully known. When you sleep, you acknowledge that you do not need to control everything, that you do not need to hold on to the light forever, that you do not need to finish the universe's story. That story will continue or not with or without you, and that does not make you smaller. It makes you free, for if the universe is temporary, then you do not need to be eternal. If everything is fragile, then gentleness toward yourself is no longer a luxury. Tonight, let the universe keep its unfinished questions. Let mathematics, physics, and human intelligence continue their work somewhere far away, and you do the small, deeply human thing that remains. Rest. Not to understand more, not to find answers, but to allow consciousness, the very thing trying to understand where it lives, to pause that effort for a while. In this stillness, you do not need to be the decoder of the universe. You only need to be a small being, drifting very slowly through a night quiet enough to sleep.